The palace thought the walls were thick enough to bury the truth forever. But at sunrise on his own birthday, the knock finally came. Not from a servant, not from a royal messenger, but from 8 officers ready to drag a fallen prince into the cold reality he had spent years outrunning. And just like that, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the man who once walked with untouchable arrogance through Golden Palace corridors, found himself staring at something he never thought he would face: consequences.
Andrew has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Now known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, he was taken into custody in Norfolk just a short while ago. He is accused of allegedly sharing confidential information with the late defender Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, just when you think the grim downfall of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor couldn't get any worse, it does. It does. It really does.
He has been long under question, long under suspicion for his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, a relationship that he appears to have lied about.
A lot of people facing serious wrath, but no one has been yet arrested. That's why this makes this a big deal, that Andrew has finally been arrested.
The arrest of a senior member of the royal family is extraordinary. It's considered unprecedented in the modern history of the British monarch.
That morning didn't feel ordinary. It didn't feel royal. It felt like judgment. Because while the world was still waking up, still pouring coffee, still scrolling through headlines, 6 police vehicles were already circling Sandringham like silent predators. 1 at the front, 5 at the back. There was no escape route, no quiet exit, no secret tunnel of privilege this time. The message was clear. They weren't here to talk. They were here to take him. Imagine the moment inside those walls. The same walls that once hosted presidents, kings, billionaires, and elites who treated Andrew like a permanent fixture of untouchable power. But now the silence was different.
The vehicles drove up the front drive. 5 of the vehicles went round the back, so there's a kind of police tactic where you appear at the front door but make sure there's not an opportunity for everyone to disappear out the back.
Heavy, suffocating, because somewhere between the royal portraits and the expensive carpets, reality had arrived, and it wasn't leaving without him. And the symbolism was almost too perfect. His birthday, February 19th, the one day meant to celebrate him, became the day that exposed him, a day that stripped away the illusion. Because birthdays are supposed to remind you of who you are. But this birthday reminded Andrew of what he had become. For decades, he moved like a man protected by invisible armor. Every scandal brushed off, every accusation softened. Every connection quietly buried under layers of royal protection and carefully crafted silence. The palace had mastered the art of disappearance. Problems didn't get solved, they vanished. But this time, nothing vanished.
This is a potential jailable offence. Now, we know that the former Prince Andrew has said of any and all allegations that have been made about him in the past in relation to his proximity and allegations in and around Jeffrey Epstein that he has claimed to be innocent.
Misconduct in public office. The words sound almost polite, almost harmless, but behind those words hides something much darker, something heavy enough to carry the weight of a life sentence. Because misconduct doesn't just mean a mistake, it means betrayal. It means abusing the trust given to you. It means turning privilege into a weapon. And Andrew had privilege like no one else. He wasn't just another official. He was royalty. He wasn't just trusted, he was untouchable. Or at least that's what everyone believed.
Andrew was arrested on his 66th birthday. Why this day? Why today? Why not yesterday? Why not tomorrow? I mean, what was so important about today, except for the fact that it's, kind of fun or interesting that it's his birthday as well.
But whispers had been growing louder for years. Quiet rumors passed between journalists, nervous conversations behind closed doors, questions nobody wanted to answer out loud, questions that lingered like ghosts inside the palace. Because this wasn't just about one man, it was about what that man had access to. Between 2001 and 2011, Andrew held one of the most sensitive positions imaginable, the UK's Special Trade Envoy. He wasn't just shaking hands and smiling for cameras. He was seeing things, hearing things, carrying information that could move markets, shift alliances, and reshape global power. Information that was never supposed to leave government walls. And yet, somehow, it did. The timing of his arrest felt like poetic justice, because while officials would insist it was coincidence, the truth felt heavier than coincidence. It felt intentional. It felt like the universe finally catching up to a man who had outrun consequences for far too long. But the real horror wasn't just the arrest. It was the reason behind it. Because buried inside the Epstein files were emails.
Or emails that indicate that Mountbatten Windsor forwarded investment opportunities for gold and uranium in Afghanistan. He had a duty of confidentiality between 2001 and 2011 as trade envoy. Did he abuse the public office? Did he violate government information?
Bold, clinical, unemotional. Emails that didn't care about royal titles or palace walls. Emails that told a story of secrets quietly shared. Secrets that were never meant to leave government hands. Confidential trade reports, investment details, sensitive diplomatic information. The kind of material that governments guard like treasure. And yet, somehow, those secrets found their way into Epstein's network. Not through hacking, not through espionage, but through trust, through Andrew. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't accidental. It was casual. That's what made it terrifying. Like forwarding a harmless message, like sending a dinner invitation. Except these weren't invitations. They were fragments of national power quietly slipping into dangerous hands. And the deeper investigators looked, the darker it became. Flight logs, incomplete passenger lists, names missing, identities hidden behind vague labels like female, 9-T flights, 9-T silent journeys carrying secrets nobody wanted to fully acknowledge. Because every missing name created a new question. Every blank space hinted at something deliberately erased. And Andrew's shadow appeared again and again.
Prime Minister Gordon Brown has pointed to emails referring to 90 flights in the UK on Epstein's Boeing jet, including arrivals at Stansted's private terminal.
But perhaps the most chilling detail wasn't found in emails or flight logs. It was found in something far more disturbing. A phrase. A simple phrase. Mrs. Windsor will arrive shortly. 4 innocent words that carried terrifying meaning behind palace doors. Because those words weren't polite. They were coded. They were understood by staff as instructions. No questions, no records, no barriers, just open.
I don't know if you can make out in the distance, basically the gate where we are. This is where we are allowed to broadcast from, but just beyond that, you enter into Windsor Great Park. You then get to another gate. I don't know if you can make out some sort of pink houses in the distance. Beyond that gate is Royal Lodge. That is where the former Prince Andrew lived until recently. He lived there for more than 20 years.
Let her in. Imagine the quiet obedience of palace staff trained never to question royalty. Imagine the doors opening silently. Imagine figures slipping inside without names, without documentation, without trace. Because in those moments, the palace wasn't a symbol of national pride. It was a fortress protecting secrets. And now investigators were tearing through that fortress piece by piece. Police weren't just arresting him. They were hunting evidence. Searching Royal Lodge, searching Sandringham, digging through computers, hard drives, documents, every digital footprint, every hidden file, every trace of truth buried beneath years of silence. Because this wasn't symbolic anymore. This was real. This was criminal. And as the investigation widened, panic began spreading beyond Andrew himself. Because secrets like this don't belong to one man alone. They live inside systems, inside institutions, inside networks built on loyalty and silence. And suddenly, the biggest question wasn't just what Andrew did, it was who else knew. Because protection officers had been there, watching, listening, standing beside him on trips, guarding him, shielding him. They saw who came and went. They knew who entered through side doors. They heard the coded phrases, and yet they said nothing. Was it loyalty, fear, or something darker? Because silence inside power isn't accidental. It's chosen. And now, even King Charles could no longer protect him. The statement came cold, formal, carefully worded. But beneath it was a brutal truth. The crown had stepped away, the shield was gone, the protection dissolved. Andrew wasn't a prince anymore. He was a liability. For years, the monarchy had survived by managing perception, controlling narratives, preserving the illusion of dignity. But illusions collapse when reality arrives with handcuffs. And now reality had arrived.
Allegedly call the duty office and say, Mrs. Windsor will arrive shortly, please. Show her up. Let her in. It makes you want to throw up when you hear this type of terminology.
The palace corridors that once echoed with privilege now echoed with something else entirely. Fear. Because this arrest wasn't just about Andrew. It was about what comes next. Because when one untouchable figure falls, it sends a message to every other untouchable figure watching. You are not invisible anymore. You are not protected anymore. You are not untouchable anymore. And somewhere behind closed doors, behind nervous smiles and controlled statements, powerful people were asking themselves a question they never thought they'd have to ask. The moment those handcuffs clicked into place, something far bigger than one man's downfall began unfolding. Because this wasn't just an arrest, it was the collapse of a carefully maintained illusion that had survived for decades. An illusion that royalty existed above consequence, above scrutiny, above the reach of ordinary justice. And now that illusion was cracking in real time, sending shockwaves through palace corridors where silence had always been the most powerful weapon. Because for years, Andrew had walked freely through scandals that would have destroyed anyone else, smiling stiffly in public while chaos followed him like a shadow, insisting he remembered nothing, explaining nothing, denying everything, and yet somehow remaining protected, shielded by a system that seemed designed not to uncover truth, but to bury it deeper. But protection only works until it doesn't. And now the same palace that once insulated him had begun quietly distancing itself, pulling away piece by piece, as if trying to erase his existence before the damage could spread further. The eviction from Royal Lodge had already signaled something was changing, because that wasn't just a housing decision, it was a message, a silent declaration that his presence had become toxic, that even his own family could no longer afford the risk of keeping him too close. And when he moved out under the cover of darkness, avoiding cameras, avoiding questions, it felt less like a relocation and more like exile, like a man being slowly erased from the world he once dominated. But exile wasn't enough anymore, because the investigation had moved beyond whispers and speculation into something tangible, something dangerous, something that threatened not just Andrew's freedom, but the reputation of the entire institution that had protected him for so long. And as investigators began digging deeper into digital records, examining emails, hard drives, archived communications, they weren't just looking for isolated mistakes, they were searching for patterns, connections, proof that the actions weren't accidental, but deliberate, calculated, repeated, because misconduct in public office isn't about one moment. It's about abuse of position, abuse of access, abuse of trust, and Andrew's position had given him access to things ordinary people could never even imagine. Confidential briefings, sensitive intelligence, high-level diplomatic conversations, and now every piece of that access was being examined under a microscope. Every interaction reinterpreted through the lens of suspicion. And perhaps the most terrifying realization for those still inside the palace was that this investigation didn't operate under royal rules, it operated under legal rules. Rules that didn't care about titles, bloodlines, or tradition. Rules that only cared about evidence. And evidence doesn't show. Loyalty, it shows truth. And as the news spread across the world, reactions poured in from survivors, critics, observers, people who had spent years watching from the outside, feeling powerless against a system that seemed immune to accountability. And now suddenly, they were witnessing something that once felt impossible, the physical manifestation vision of justice approaching someone who had always seemed beyond its reach. But justice is never clean, and it never arrives without consequences beyond its immediate target. Because Andrew's arrest wasn't just exposing him, it was exposing everyone connected to him, everyone who had defended him, everyone who had dismissed accusations as rumors, everyone who had remained silent when questions first emerged, and silence, once exposed, becomes its own kind of evidence. And inside royal circles, conversations were shifting from denial to damage control, from dismissal to survival, because the monarchy itself was now at risk, its credibility hanging in the balance, its future dependent on convincing the public that it was not complicit in protecting wrongdoing. And King Charles understood this better than anyone, which is why his response had been so carefully distant, so emotionally detached, because this wasn't just about a brother anymore, it was about preserving an institution older than both of them, an institution that could not afford to fall, alongside Andrew. But even that distancing couldn't fully separate the monarchy from the scandal, because Andrew wasn't an outsider, he was family, he was blood, he was part of the structure itself, and removing him didn't erase the damage he had already caused, it only confirmed how serious that damage had become. And as investigators continued their work, the possibility of further revelations hung heavily in the air, because arrests don't happen in isolation, they happen when investigators believe there is enough evidence to justify escalation, enough evidence to move from suspicion to action, and that meant something had changed behind the scenes, something had tipped the balance, something had made protection impossible. And for Andrew, the reality of that shift was unavoidable, because no matter how many privileges he once held, no matter how many doors once opened automatically at his approach, none of it could stop the process now unfolding around him. None of it could reverse the moment when power failed to protect him. Because power is only absolute until someone challenges it, and once challenged, it begins to unravel faster than anyone expects. And now, every movement he made, every legal step, every court appearance, every statement would be watched with relentless attention, analyzed not as royal activity, but as the actions of a man facing potential criminal consequences. And perhaps the most haunting part of it all was the realization that this moment, this arrest, wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because investigations grow, evidence accumulates, connections expand, and the deeper investigators go, the more they uncover, and the more they uncover, the harder it becomes to contain the fallout. Because Andrew's arrest wasn't just a conclusion, it was an opening, a signal that barriers once considered permanent could be broken, that systems once considered impenetrable could be penetrated, that titles once considered protective could become meaningless in the face of law. And somewhere beyond the palace gates, beyond the cameras and statements and legal teams, a simple truth had finally emerged. A truth that had been buried beneath decades of privilege and silence. A truth that had waited patiently for its moment, and now that moment had arrived. Because for the first time in his life, Andrew was no longer protected by what he was born into, he was defined by what he had done. And in that transformation, the most powerful illusion of all had finally shattered.